It's barely light out, and a boy is carrying a cardboard box across a gravel lot. Careful, like it's full of eggs. It's not eggs. Inside are 2 baby goats, no bigger than house cats, wobbly-legged and bleeding, the kind of bottle babies most dairy operations don't want. Triplets. Nobody has room to bottle feed around the clock, or kids born small and weak, culled off because raising them costs more time than they're worth to a farm, running on a schedule. He sets the box in the bed of an old feed truck, climbs in after it, and doesn't say a word to the man waiting behind the wheel. Just checks on the 2 kids one more time before they pull out. By the end of this one, you'll know exactly why a box of rejected baby goats was worth getting up before sunrise for. If this is your first time here, go ahead and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's back up and meet him properly. Blue Hollow sits up on the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee, a scatter of ridgetop farms and hollows where the growing season's short and the ground's rockier than most people would want to farm. There's a general store, a church, a livestock auction barn that runs Thursdays, and a handful of cattle operations that have been the backbone of the local economy for generations, though cattle prices haven't been kind lately, and more than a few families have had to find something else to lean on. Eli Hartsell was 13 the spring this story starts, youngest of 3, quiet in the way that gets overlooked at a crowded supper table. From a family that ran beef cattle on land his grandfather had cleared by hand. Eli wasn't the kid anybody expected much from, not the one who won at the county fair, not the one teachers bragged on. He was the one who noticed which animals were struggling before anybody else caught it, who'd sit with a sick calf longer than the job required. What started it all was a runt goat kid a neighbor was fixing to put down rather than bottle raise. Eli asked if he could take her instead. His family had never kept goats. Cattle was cattle, and that was the family business. But nobody much minded one extra mouth to feed if Eli was the one feeding it. The woman who taught him to raise that first kid right, and the many that followed, was Ruth Calloway, 73. Who'd run a small dairy goat operation up the ridge for 40 years and had strong opinions about people who took on animals without understanding them. Ruth wasn't warm to him at first. When Eli showed up with questions about bottle feeding schedules, she told him plainly that a lot of kids wanted the cute part and none of the work, and sent him home without much else. He came back 2 days later having already mixed his own feeding schedule and kept a log of the runt's weight gain on notebook paper and asked Ruth to check his math. She checked it, told him half of it needed fixing, but she kept teaching him after that because, as she put it, she'd met plenty of people who wanted her to do the thinking for them, and he clearly hadn't wanted that at all. The piece of wisdom Ruth gave him that stuck for years. A goat will show you exactly what it needs, if you're willing to shut up and watch long enough. Most folks fail at this because they're too busy telling the goat what it needs instead. The first real mistake came with overfeeding. Eli, eager to see the runt kid catch up in size, gave her more milk replacer than her stomach could handle, and she came down with bad scours, a dangerous digestive upset in young goats that can turn fatal fast if it's not corrected. Ruth walked him through diluting the formula and easing back the volume, and the kid pulled through, but it scared him enough that he kept a strict log after that. The second mistake was housing. He kept 2 new bottle babies in a drafty section of the barn through a cold snap, and both came down with a chest cold that took weeks of careful nursing to clear. After that, Ruth taught him to watch for drafts at kid height, since cold air sinks and settles right where a small animal beds down, even in a barn that feels fine to a grown person standing up. The third was thinking bigger meant better. Eli took in 5 bottle babies at once from a farm doing a big cull, more than he could properly bottle feed on schedule, and 2 fell behind on weight before he caught it and scaled back to what he could actually manage. Word got around Blue Hollow. Eli's Uncle Dale, who ran cattle alongside Eli's father and had opinions about most things, said at the auction barn more than once that the boy was playing house with rejects instead of learning real livestock work. But Eli's sister, Maddie, 16 and no more a goat person than anybody else in the family, started helping with bottle rounds before school anyway, mostly because Eli asked and she wasn't the type to say no to her brother. The turn came at the county fair, almost by accident. Eli entered 2 of his raised bottle babies, animals nobody else had wanted, in the youth dairy goat show, mostly because Ruth pushed him to, and he didn't feel like arguing. Both goats placed, not because they were rare or expensive stock, they were culls after all, but because they'd been raised with careful, consistent attention from birth, and it showed in their condition, their coats, the calm way they handled being led around a show ring. A judge remarked, loud enough for people nearby to hear, that whoever had raised those 2 clearly knew what they were doing. Dale was standing close enough to hear it. He didn't say anything to Eli that day, but the next week, he mentioned to Eli's father that he had a neighbor with a couple of extra bottle babies going free if the boy wanted them. The real test came that winter, when Eli's small herd had grown to 9 goats. A respiratory outbreak came through, something Ruth suspected had come in with a newly acquired kid that hadn't been properly quarantined first, and within days, 4 of Eli's goats were sick, coughing, off their feed. It was frightening in a way none of the earlier setbacks had been. Goat pneumonia can move fast and kill young or weak animals within days if it's not caught early. Eli barely slept that week, checking temperatures, keeping the sick animals separated and warm, following the treatment plan Ruth and a livestock vet worked out with him over the phone. He lost 1 goat. It hit him hard, the first real loss of the whole effort, but the other 3 pulled through, and Ruth made him build a proper quarantine pen after, so any new animal spent 2 full weeks isolated and watched before joining the rest of the herd. It wasn't a triumphant recovery. It was a hard week and a real loss, and a lesson Eli never had to learn twice. By the following year, Eli's herd had grown enough that he started selling raw milk shares to a few families in the hollow, and Ruth helped him learn basic soap making so the milk that didn't move fast enough could still turn a profit as goat milk soap sold at the general store. Winter stayed the hardest season every year. Kidding season often landed in the coldest months, meaning newborn kids needed round-the-clock warmth checks some nights. Eli built a simple heat lamp setup in a windbreak-protected corner of the barn and learned to read a kid's shiver and stance well enough to know before it became an emergency. Dale's ark stayed quiet the whole way through. He started stopping by Eli's pens on his way to check his own cattle, at first just to look, then to ask a question or 2 about the soap business, then, eventually, to bring his granddaughter by so she could bottle feed one of the newest kids herself. It was Dale who eventually said, plainly, what the family had mostly stopped arguing about anyway. It happened at the auction barn, watching Eli load 2 goats he'd sold to a family 2 farms over. Nothing dramatic about the moment at all. Didn't figure there was a living in other people's rejects, Dale said mostly to himself. Guess I was wrong about that. No speech followed it. Just an old cattleman saying the plain truth once it was too obvious to keep ignoring. Blue Hollow doesn't look dramatically different today. The auction barn still runs Thursdays. Cattle's still the backbone of most farms up there. But Eli's goat operation is a known thing now. Not a joke anybody tells at the feed store. And a couple of younger kids in the hollow have started their own small bottle baby projects, taught the basics by Eli, who never rushes anybody through it. What changed here wasn't the economy of Blue Hollow. It was smaller than that. A quiet boy took in the animals nobody else wanted, paid attention the way Ruth taught him to, and let the results speak for themselves, one goat at a time. That's the story from Blue Hollow. If you enjoyed it, subscribe for more, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. See you next time.